my Juicy co-creators, Lilu here on the Juicy Living Tour. Today I'm in London, in England, as you can tell, in Earl's Court area actually, and I'm sitting with you. I'm so excited to do this interview. I've heard so many great things. You wrote many books. We're going to talk about out-of-body experience, near death, immortality, maybe Deja Vu. You've been very interested about those phenomenon. Let's start with just quickly the Deja Vu. What do you mean by Deja Vu?
Okay, Deja Vu is technically the sensation that you've lived something before, that you've experienced something before, a recognition that you have a memory sometime in your past that you've lived this moment before. Phenomenally common, somewhere in the region of 70% of people will have at least one Deja Vu sensation in their life.
And this is not optical?
No, it's not optical. There is a theory called the Ephron hypothesis, which suggests that it's to do with the way in which the eyes process information. However, there's been work done at the University of Leeds over here in the UK by a guy called Akira O'Connor, and this has actually shown that people who are actually born blind they actually have déjà sensations where they hear something again rather than see something again.
Déjà entendu.
Déjà entendu, that's quite correct. My French is terrible, by the way.
It's handy to have a French woman, huh?
It certainly is, absolutely, and to be corrected, and particularly because my pronunciation is awful as far as French goes. I'm okay on Italian a little bit, but French is awful. But anyway, yeah, the idea that they have hearing and they hear something twice. So clearly the old psychological ideas of what déjà vu is somewhat out of the water. So we're back to square one. Exactly what is a déjà vu sensation?
Yeah. And why are we having them? What does it mean? Because I know you wrote many books. The first one was Life After Death?
Yeah, Is There Life After Death? The Extraordinary Science of What Happens When We Die. Which
many copies sold, huh?
Yeah, no, around about 40,000 copies worldwide and lots of foreign language. And it still continues to sell. You know, my first publisher still says there's showing no signs of stopping. We're still always and they're always negotiating new language deals as well.
More and more people, I'm so interested about those topics. I know millions of people on this planet collectively are so curious about this. So what did you find out about those déjà vus, and where does it come from, and what does it mean about the nature of our reality?
Well, I'd like to believe that, it's not what I'd like to believe, it's what the evidence seems to suggest is that déjà vus are very much linked neurologically to the phenomenon known as migraine. You know, migraine headaches or classical migraine. We have what's called a migraine aura. It's also linked to people who have temporal lobe epilepsy or experience temporal lobe epilepsy. And when people have migraines or temporal lobe epilepsy, they have what's called an aura sensation, which is an early warning system that you're going to have a headache or you're going to have a seizure. When they have them, one of the warnings is this sensation of you've lived this moment before. Now, it can be linked here because there is a neurotransmitter in the brain called glutamate, and glutamate is the major chemical of the brain that helps brain cells communicate with each other, called a neurotransmitter. But what is intriguing about this is that there is another phenomenon that glutamate is known to be responsible for, or directly responsible for, and it's something called the near-death experience. You know, the stories where you hear people are in car crashes or they have a cardiac arrest or whatever, and they suddenly find themselves floating outside of their body. They find themselves meeting other beings, the being of light. They go to another place.
They see their past really fast.
But the interesting point is one of the major typologies is something called a panoramic life review. And the panoramic life review, as you've probably heard people say, is my life flash before my eyes. Now, if that is the case and this neurochemical brings about this sensation, one has to assume if your life flashes before your eyes, it's suggested that it's been recorded. Because for me, I can't sit here now and think of my life, you know, probably you can't either. You couldn't just think through your life from your memories. But those memories are there. And in fact, there was a guy, an American neurosurgeon called Wilder Penfield, who did a series of experiments on the exposed brains of conscious patients during operations, and he was able to elicit memories of people's past. And he came to the conclusion that the human brain records everything. So it's just because we can't recall it doesn't mean it's not there. And we know this from hypnotism. You know, people can be hypnotized back to a time in their past where they can actually see it as it was. Now, if this is the case, this means that we have within our brains a recording. Now, is the life flashing in front of your eyes in a near-death experience that memories? And could it be that under normal circumstances, when you have a real death experience, It doesn't flash at all. It actually is a real, literal, minute-by-minute recreation of your life, a three-dimensional matrix-like movie, a sense-around, something I call technically the Bohmian IMAX, in deference to an American physicist called David Bohm. But the idea that we're like in the Matrix, you're in a Matrix recording of your own life. So in which case, we might have done this many, many times. You know, this might be the first time we've done this actual recording, or it could be the 20,000th. We're living in a groundhog life, a groundhog day.
So what's the implication of that? Can we actually slow down, and can we, because I also want to ask you about time and space, because I know you wrote a book about that, and obviously we have to go there if we're starting to speak of, is that actually stored first? Is that actually stored, this information, in that brain? Or because we hear of the Akashic records and we hear of the field and all of it is outside. So now I'm confused with you saying it's in the brain.
Yeah, effectively, when I wrote my first book, Is the Life After Death, I was very much of the opinion that the brain held the information, and there's been various work done on the idea that it's stored holographically. Because one of the major problems that neurologists have had is that they've never actually been able to find the source of memory within the brain. So, they just never have been able to find it. They know how it might be processed, but where the memories are kept. Now, as time has progressed and I've researched more and read more and encountered more researchers, I'm very much of the opinion that Irvin Laszlo is correct in his idea of what he calls the Akashic field, the Akashic record. And the idea is that at the baseline of reality, there is something called the 0 point field. 0 point information and 0 point energy. Without getting technical about it, but this is an energy that is everywhere. And this energy can hold information. Now, if this is the case, it means effectively that while we experience things, we're downloading every experience onto this super duper database. And that database contains everything that could ever happen and everything that ever will happen. So is it a question of us downloading the information onto the database, or are we uploading it from the database as if we are living in a three-dimensional computer game? In which case, we're in a computer game and every alternate action that can be taken actually is already encoded within the database. And this makes to me rational sense. So it means that you don't just have this one life, you have every potential outcome of your life that you can possibly pursue. Every decision you make is encoded there. Now again, people will turn around and say, well, that's not scientific. I'd suggest that people check up the work of Stephen Hawking and a guy called Thomas Hertog. Hawking, as you know, is one of the world's leading authorities on physics. You also have Thomas Hertog, who's a research scientist at CERN. Hawking and Hertog wrote a paper in 2006 called The Top-Down Hypothesis of Quantum Physics. In this, they suggested that every outcome is already out there. All we do is we collapse the wave function of this reality rather than another one. But that other reality still is encoded and exists. So there is more and more evidence to say we are within a computer game. So in which case we will do this many times. You know, I will do this interview in subtly different ways. It may rain on us. It may not rain on us.
For the sunshine here.
And the sunshine seems to be coming out at the moment. So we seem to be influencing our environment at the moment.
Yeah, that's it. How do you get to that best possibility? Since there is all those possibilities, infinite possibilities out there. How did you pick the best one, and how do you get to this best scenario right now in this life? Because we're right now in this life.
I think the best analogy of this is put forward in my second book, The Daemon: A Guide to Your Extraordinary Secret Self. And in that, I suggest that you've all had it. I'll guarantee there are people out there that have had that sensation that you're about to do something, and either a voice in your head or an ill-at-ease feeling takes you, and you think, don't do this. Now, in The Daemon, I cite example after example of individuals who have had exactly that sensation. And they've saved their lives. There was one guy, he told me that he was driving along a road, and suddenly he heard a voice in his head say, turn in, and he felt in turning the wheel. And he turned the wheel in as a lorry came belting down on the wrong side of the road.
Lorry is a truck for people in the US.
Oh, a truck, sorry.
No, yeah, I love it. I'm joking because, of course, we know.
Yeah, absolutely. You've got to watch these quaint Englishisms. But effectively, that guy's life was changed. He was saved. Now, I would argue that in a previous run of the game, the Groundhog Day, the Groundhog Life, which is in fact the Russian title of my book in Russian, is The Groundhog Life, is that he died. But this time round he survived, and within this version of the program he survived. which means effectively that you can pursue every single route, but you have to listen to that, what your heart tells you, what the instinctive feel tells you. Now, I call it the daemon, and I call it the daemon because I believe there is part of you that knows all the outcomes of the lives. Now, whether that being actually only knows the previous games you've played. You know when you're playing a computer game and you start playing the computer game and you've got the little sprite on the screen, you're Lara Croft or whatever, and she runs down a corridor and she gets eaten by the monster. You then go back to the start of the game because Lara's dead, and she's reborn again. She has no more memories of what happened, but you do as the game player. So this time you go down the corridor and you avoid the monster, and she survives for a little bit longer. And then she gets eaten again. But over a period of time, you will learn the game. And by learning the game, you will get to the point where you'll live the perfect life. And I think this is where my hypothesis, called cheating the ferryman, is similar to the idea of karma, and it's similar to the idea of reincarnation. You live your life over and over again, then you live the perfect life and you become an avatar, or whatever we term it, and you're allowed to move on. Just as Connors does in Groundhog Day. After all those days, he eventually moves on to the next day.
Could all those days be simultaneously happening at the same time?
Yeah, this is the interesting thing, because what we do here is we perceive time, and we consider that time is linear and then it flows. And it flows from the future into the present, and then it disappears into the past. When you think about this, this doesn't make any real sense, because in order for something to flow, it has to have something it flows against. Now, for instance, Marcus Aurelius, the famous Roman philosopher, said time is a river. The only reason you know a river flows is there are riverbanks. So you need something to gauge the flow. But if you sit back and think about it, what do we measure time against? There isn't anything we measure time against, because time has nothing that you can measure it against. You can have a pound of apples, and you can weigh a pound of apples. But a minute is a minute. A minute takes a minute to pass. But your minute and my minute might be completely different. Say you're in pain now and you're really feeling sad. Your minute could last forever, whereas my minute, because I'm excited and things are really great, it goes flashes by. The summer holidays flash by for children. And this is because time is subjective, which means it's a creation of the mind. The same goes for space. I mean, people seem to think that space is something that's somehow three-dimensional and out there. Whereas Albert Einstein himself said, if you take away the fields that we exist within and leave space as it is, there is nothing. There is nothing. And again, Albert Einstein said, time is an illusion, but a very, very persistent one. And it's because he knew that time dilates, at the speed of light, time stops. We are being illuminated by photons at the moment that are coming down, light particles. These light particles travel at the speed of light. From the point of view of a light particle, everything happens instantaneously because they are existing in a world where time doesn't exist. So the light particles that are bouncing, that left the sun 8.5 minutes ago, that are hitting us at the moment, as far as they're concerned, they are still on the sun, and they're here, and they're everywhere. So in which case, time and everything else is far more complex. And I deal with this in my book, The Labyrinth of Time. And I spend 380 pages going through it, and I'm still at the end of it. I'm like St. Augustine. I still don't understand exactly what time is, but I know it's not what we think it is. So there is time is an illusion. Three-dimensional space is an illusion. They're both mind-created illusions. What is really going on is what the information field that we exist within, which is timeless.
Hence the present moment is so important. And what is the present moment, actually?
Exactly.
It's always flowing, isn't it? So can we really say it's the present moment, or it's now?
Philosophers for years, James, the American scientist, called it the specious present. The idea of exactly how long is now. By the time the moment you've thought about now, it's already gone. So sit back and think about this. I'm existing at the moment. The future is yet to exist. The past has ceased to exist. The only thing that exists is the nexus point that we call the present moment, which is already gone.
And when we think of it, it's gone. But when we're in it, we're in it.
But we're in it. So in which case, the illusion of time, the more you think about time, and again, this is why St. Augustine said that if people ask me, do I understand time? I do, until I think about it. And the moment you think about it, the whole thing becomes a massive, massive mystery. But this is how most people rush through their lives without ever thinking about these philosophical concepts. But they're profound. The idea, for instance, how does the jelly and electrical impulses in your brain bring about the concept of Lilo or Tony? You know, your hopes, your fears, your memories. But how can that be? It's inanimate matter. How does inanimate matter interface with consciousness, with memories and everything else? These are ethereal things. You can never measure a thought. Okay, people will argue you can do an EEG scan and you'll see the spikes, but that's not measuring the thought. That's measuring the electrical activity. It's not measuring the thoughts themselves.
Do you feel that now there's such a thing as we're picking up more and more, all of us? Is that an individual evolution that we're living, or is it because collectively there's something happening that makes us more and more aware and more living this reality that is absolutely juicy? Isn't it? Can life be so juicy? Oh my God. How is this? I feel like I'm awakening every day more and more, you know, and faster and it's brighter. And how do you get into this? I know you're getting lately into more and more the light. Is that related?
Yeah, very much so. I mean, my next book, called The Infinite Minefield, I'll be discussing the role of light itself and the role of internal light. There are substances, there are biophotons. This is light that's given off by DNA. And DNA itself gives off single photon light, and it comes out from the DNA. There's an associate of mine, a friend of mine called Professor Istvan Bokken, who is a research scientist in Hungary. And he's recently shown that the human eyes, the eyes give off light. They give photons out as well as they take them in. So when you see somebody's eyes sparkling, it's because they really are. There really is photons coming out. Now, if it is the case that all our cells and all our DNA is giving out light, where is that light going? And I believe that light is going into the pineal gland. Because as we know, the pineal gland is a form of eye. It has certain elements that it could be like an eye, but it's deep inside the brain. And it has no access to light. So what light can it process? And I believe it's processing the light from the cells themselves. And I think this is the light you see when you dream. Have you ever wondered, when you're dreaming, where does that light come from? You know, because you're seeing things as if they are illuminated. And I believe that is the inner illumination of a reality that's just as real as this one. I believe that when we dream, when we lucid dream particularly, we go to alternate realities that are just as real as this one. In other words, why should we... There's a term I came across recently, being materialistic chauvinists. The idea that we're being chauvinists because we believe this reality is the only reality that's possible. For instance, we are seeing everything now, and it's reflections of electromagnetic energy. The photons bouncing off things. The electromagnetic spectrum, we see a tiny, tiny section of that. And in my latest book, I give an example of this. If the electromagnetic spectrum, from the ultraviolet, infrared, the whole the full spectrum from gamma rays and X-rays right down there, right up to the other end, was the Mississippi River. And the Mississippi River, as you know, runs from somewhere in Minnesota, a little lake in Minnesota, down to the Gulf of Mexico. That's everything that's reality that we can perceive. The bit that we perceive that makes up all of this would be 8 inches of the Mississippi River just south of Hannibal. In, I think it's Missouri, I'm not sure. It was where Mark Twain used to live anyway. But about 8 inches. That's it. And that little bit is what we believe is reality. Then we have alternate universes. We have evidence of the idea that there are more than one universe. We have the idea of time, orthogonal time, time that works in different dimensions to our own time. These again are things, string theory, these are things that our science is now telling us are actual facts. You know, okay, they are theories, but they are theories that try to explain the observed behavior of subatomic particles. The universe is magical, and we're only starting to touch upon it now. But we are central. Your consciousness and my consciousness is central to this. We collapse the wave function of reality by observing it. And isn't that wonderful?
It's exciting. I'm hearing also that in us there's a lot of there's universes too. It gets smaller and smaller.
Yeah, the idea that It's what Professor David Bohm, I mentioned the term before, I call the idea of this illusionary reality the Bohmian IMAX, because David Bohm suggested that reality is enfolded in itself. So rather like a hologram, for instance, I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but if you take a holographic image, a light holographic image, and you take it apart, it's not like a normal picture. A normal picture you would, like a jigsaw puzzle, you take it apart and each bit of the jigsaw puzzle is part of the whole. It's part of the whole picture. With a hologram, each of the parts of the hologram contain the whole. In other words, there's a denuded image, it's not quite as sharp, of the whole image, which means that everything is enfolded inside itself. So when William Blake said to see the universe in a wild flower, he was right. The idea is the whole universe could be in a teardrop dropping down your eye, and within that teardrop will be a version of you. So in which case everything is enfolded. So something we have suddenly this inner space. But it becomes more complex because Stephen Hawking has come up with this idea of mini black holes. And they've argued that the universe is full of billions and billions of mini black holes. And mini black holes, as you know, are things that suck information in and suck them out again into a white hole. That means there's millions and millions of mini black holes in your brain. Which means that your brain itself, which is 99.9999 reoccurring empty space, because, of course, if you look at an electron, you look at an atom, what is an atom? An atom is the nucleus and these little whizzy things called electrons whizzing round. And the difference in the size, it's like a fly flying around a huge cathedral dome. And that is what makes up the reality. So everything is made up of mostly empty space. And even the particles themselves are not solid in the way we perceive solid. They're fluctuations in a field. So suddenly, where is this reality going? What do we really mean when we say reality? Because what quantum physics is proving is that there ain't no reality. What's going on is in here, inside each observing brain. Because the only thing you know with absolute fact, isn't it, is that you are. I know it's Descartes, and people will turn around and say, oh, he's doing the old Descartes duality rubbish. But the actual fact of the matter is, you out there do not know anything other than the fact that you exist. Nothing else is real. And the reason it's not real is your brain processes information. People believe that what you're seeing now is what's out there. Think about this. Light waves are hitting your eye, going onto the retina in the back of your eye, which is a tiny inverted postage stamp image. And it's tiny. That then is converted into electrical signals, which goes down certain areas into your brain, into your visual processing area of the brain. That then recreates from those electrical signals this. Is that not magic? So how can you possibly believe that what's out there is what you think it is? Your brain tells you it is, because you say, I can feel things. There was one famous quote by an English philosopher when somebody turned around and said that reality is in the mind. And he said, I refute it thus. And he kicked a stone and said, I can feel the stone and I refute it. The reality is that when you kick a stone, all that happens is you get a signal, electrical signal, going from your toe up into your brain, which is converted into the idea you have a sensation that you've kicked something. So suddenly everything is internal. We are what it is. But the only thing you know with reality is that you are you. You can never prove that I'm anything other than a figment of your mind, because you can't. Now, people would argue that's solipsism, but nevertheless, that is the most rational way of seeing the universe. The answer to it is that we are all one single entity experiencing itself subjectively, as Bill Hicks said. In other words, we are all one consciousness. And we're all just like existing in our own soap opera. And we're enjoying it, and we're creating this universe around us because that's where we're at ease with. Possibly.
I love it. And I love how you also question and you say, I still put my books out there and I've changed and things have evolved, and you accept, and you're still in the inquiry, because really it's about this inquiry. Huh?
Oh, totally. I mean, when people read my books, people assume that the books came fully formed and that each one of them it relates to each one of the others. It doesn't. I'm nobody special. I'm just somebody who is fascinated by what am I and what am I doing here, and what does science tell me and what does my mind tell me about the reality. So in which case, when I write my first book, I was quite materialist reductionist. I genuinely believed that the brain generated consciousness, and it was what was called an epiphenomenon of brain functioning. and that everything is in the brain. As things have developed, I've started to take a much broader aspect of this, and I've read more papers. And I do say to people, when you read my books, I reference everything. Every single reference is referenced back to academic papers, to other writers, to books. The reason being that I very much take the old idea of extraordinary claims need extraordinary proofs. I say to my readers, you go out, read up the stuff I've read up, and come to your own conclusions on it. And if you feel I've made the wrong decisions and the wrong coming together, that's fine. Let me know about it. I'm very active on Facebook. I have a very active forum. I want people to talk to me. I want people to give me their ideas, which means as the years have gone on, my ideas have changed, my position has changed, and I write this up in my books. My books are iterative. They're almost like a biography or an autobiography of somebody changing their opinion. And my next book, for instance, I will be writing a book with Professor Irving Laszlo on what evidence do we have that consciousness can exist outside of the brain.
If you don't know who Laszlo is, please check out my interview with him. I interviewed him in France, in Reims. Amazing man. So sweet, so sweet. I love that balance between the intellect and the heart, where there's both of those sides in. It's so precious. Oh my God, I want to squeeze his cheeks,
He's, and again, he's been nominated for the Nobel Prize. I think it's either twice or three times. And when he contacted me out of the blue, he'd written the foreword for my book, The Out of the Body Experience, and he gave me a wonderful foreword on that. And he just contacted me and he said, I'd like to write a book with you on out of the idea of consciousness in the brain. And I turned around and I said, I'm so honoured. Surely there must be so many other people around the world. You're world famous. Why do you want to write a book with little me? And he turned around and he said, because I think you're the only person in the world that's qualified to write it with me. And I thought, wow, what a wonderful thing to say, and I felt really, really humbled by that. And I know that sounds like a fake, but it isn't. I am a huge admirer of Irving Laszlo. He is incredible.
Last little thing there's so much information out there. How do you, I know you're running also your battles. How do you determine what's right, what's wrong, how to move forward? What are some of the, little red flags that you see?
It's just interesting this, because if you are existing in a computer program of your own life and your daemon, your higher self, is guiding you through the life, how does the daemon communicate things to you? Now, some people say they hear a voice in their head that argues, tells them to do things, but most of us aren't that advanced and our daemon can't communicate. So I sometimes think, do deja vu sensations, are they little tweaks to say you're on the right route or not? I also am quite intrigued by what's called the 1111 prompt phenomenon. And the idea that sometimes you will see the numbers 1111 somewhere. Now, there are associates of mine that have written books on this subject. But I initially thought, well, is it just because there are 4 downstrokes? And of course, human beings, we are trained to look at things that are downstrokes because most things are straight and we just notice them because they're different. But I think it's more than that. And funnily enough, I found myself that was the case because I was talking to my wife about this about 3 years ago. And I said, this 1111, I'm seeing it anywhere. And she looked at me and she said, the biggest 1111 prompt you've got is one of your book titles. And I said, how do you mean? And she said, look at the book title of your Dutch edition of your first book, Is There Life After Death? Get this, guys. It's called 111111. Okay? And 111111 in Dutch is life after life after life. Now that sent a shiver up my spine.
All Dutch co-creators, by the way, because people from Holland are here and listening, so they'll get that.
Yeah, absolutely. Get hold of the book. It's published by Ank Hermes, by the way. And it's 11, na 11, na 11. And just incredible. And the 1111 phenomenon, again, if you go onto my forum and onto my website, there's lots of material on the 1111 stuff as well. But there are much better writers on the subject than myself. But it does seem it's a message. Or is it just simply confirmation bias and attention bias, as the psychologist would say? You're looking for it, so you see it. And I don't know. But I think I know that it seems significant to me.
Yeah. I feel perfectly on track when I hear it.
Yes, you feel that this is right. But sometimes, we were discussing this before, the idea that sometimes you're in the right place. There is this kind of just sensation. Is it your daemon telling you that it's right? But, that kind of feeling at one-ment. The word atonement, it's actually at one-ment, with the universe. The idea that this is where you are now, and this is perfection. And it's the perfect moment. Again, mystics talk about it. They talk about the oceanic feeling, the oceanic sensation. But these things are all linked. The idea that you know when it's right because it just feels right. It's just in your heart. It's very much heart-led rather than brain-led.
I know the Daemon is your second book. Is it outside or inside of us?
I think it's both, in the sense that I think your daemon is your universal self. It is your eternal self. It's your immortal self. It's your selfhood that is outside of linear time and outside of space and time. It exists in what Philip K. Dick, the American science fiction writer stroke philosopher, called orthogonal time. It's the time that is perpendicular to this time. In other words, the argument is every second that we exist in actually has a perpendicular time running from it. And it exists there, so it can view and it can see. Now, the Indians have a concept called, I think it's called the Linga Sarya, the long body. And what they believe is, now, if you think about this, if you took a time-lapse photograph of yourself from the moment of your birth to the moment of your death, you know where you see photographs of somebody moving their hand, and if the time-lapse is right, you see a continual movement of just a blur. Imagine if you did that for your whole life, from the moment of your birth to the moment of your death. You would be just like this creature, like a snake, that gets smaller and gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and gets smaller and smaller again. And each moment of your life, you're just a slice of that long body. Now again, the scientists out there will say he's talking about Minkowski's block time. It's exactly what I'm talking about. This is exactly what Minkowski said. Now, the critical fusion facility of the human eye that makes things move is, I think, around about 50 images to the second. Maybe 25, I'm not sure. But that's what makes you see things move, like a cartoon. So when I move my hand, your eyes will go and see images and make them blur together. Imagine a creature that has a critical fusion facility of 1 year. The planet Earth wouldn't be a sphere, it would be a kind of a hoop going round the sun. Well, in fact, it would be a spiral as the sun moves through the galaxy. For that creature, that is as much reality as our reality is. And the same goes for little creatures like houseflies. How can you never hit a housefly? Because a housefly exists in a different kind of time to you. The housefly's life of 3 days, as far as the housefly is concerned, is 70 years. A mouse is the same. We all live, the time is the element. And this is why I think death is an illusion. Because death happens in time. And in my book, my first book, I very much say this, that it's time. You die in time. Other people witness you die. But in your own mind, time stops at the point of death, and you go into orthogonal time, and then you go back and you live your life again.
So we're immortal.
We're immortal, effectively. Or at least we're immortal as long as it seems possible that we are. Yeah. That if we can come back time and time again. Immortality, if time is timeless, you will be immortal. But if we're all part of the same essence, as it were, we are immortal. Because everything that we perceive is created by the essence that is us. The external world is the eternal world. And the external world is the external world. It's David Bohm's implicate and explicate orders. And again, I suggest look up David Bohm. His work was phenomenal.
I'm going to go and interview him.
Absolutely. Oh, you could do, but he's dead, unfortunately.
Ah, that's the same for Osho. I wanted to interview. I saw a video of Osho one day, a few years ago, on the internet, and I'm like, I want to interview this guy. Lilu, not too late. So I'm running around the world to meet people like you. Thank you so much for this inspiration. Thank
you for inviting me along. It's been a wonderful, wonderful day, and it's a typical London sky. Wimbledon's on, you know. That's why the sky's grey. Yeah. But
you're going to go right back to it, huh?
Yeah, that's back. I'm back at Wimbledon tomorrow because I'm doing a contract for them. So I'll be back at overlooking Centre Court for a few days, which is very nice.
Lucky you enjoy that. My beautiful co-creators all around the world. You know how lucky we are to have this kind of information and be able to spread it. So please share them with as many people as possible. These videos are priceless, beautiful captures, archives of this magnificent knowledge and information. And beyond that, the energy right now that is from this conversation back at you from this beautiful capital that is London. I send you much, much love, my delicious co-creators. Bye-bye. Big blessings. Bye. The first one was Life After Death?
Yeah, Is There Life After Death? The Extraordinary Science of What Happens When We Die, which...
Many copies sold, though.
Yeah, no, around about 40,000 copies worldwide and lots of foreign language, and it still continues to sell. You know, my first publisher still says there's showing no signs of stopping. We're still always, and they're always negotiating new language deals as well.
More and more people, I'm so interested about those topics. I know millions of people on this planet collectively are so curious about this. So what did you find out about those déjà vus, and where does it come from, and what does it mean about the nature of our reality?
Well, I'd like to believe that, it's not what I'd like to believe, it's what the evidence seems to suggest is that déjà vus are very much linked neurologically to the phenomenon known as migraine. You know, migraine headaches or classical migraine. We have what's called a migraine aura. It's also linked to people who have temporal lobe epilepsy or experience temporal lobe epilepsy. And when people have migraines or temporal lobe epilepsy, they have what's called an aura sensation, which is an early warning. One has to assume if your life flashes before your eyes, it's suggested that it's been recorded. Because for me, I can't sit here now and think of my life, you know, probably you can't either. You couldn't just think through your life from your memories. But those memories are there. And in fact, there was a guy, an American neurosurgeon called Wilder Penfield, who did a series of experiments on the exposed brains of conscious patients during operations. And he was able to elicit memories of people's past. And he came to the conclusion that the human brain records everything. So it's just because we can't recall it doesn't mean it's not there. And we know this from hypnotism. You know, people can be hypnotized back to a time in their past where they can actually see it as it was. Now, if this is the case, this means that we have within our brains a recording. Now, is the life flashing in front of your eyes in a near-death experience that memories? And could it be that under normal circumstances, when you have a real death experience, it doesn't flash at all? It actually is a real, literal, minute-by-minute recreation of your life.
Hello, my Juicy co-creators. Lilu here on the Juicy Living Tour. Today I'm in London, in England, as you can tell, in Earl's Court area, actually, and I'm sitting with you. I'm so excited to do this interview. I've heard so many great things. You wrote many books. We're going to talk about out-of-body experience, near-death, immortality, maybe deja vu. You've been very interested about those phenomenon. Let's start with just quickly the deja vu. What do you mean by deja vu?
Okay, deja vu is technically the sensation that you've lived something before, that you've experienced something before, a recognition that you have a memory sometime in your past that you've done this, you've lived this moment before. Phenomenally common, somewhere in the region of 70% of people will have at least one deja vu sensation in their life.
And this is not optical?
No, it's not optical. There is a theory called the Ephron hypothesis, which suggests that it's to do with the way in which the eyes process information. However, there's been work done at the University of Leeds over here in the UK by a guy called Akira O'Connor, and this has actually shown that people who are actually born blind they actually have deja sensations where they hear something again rather than see something again.
Déjà entendu.
Déjà entendu, that's quite correct. My French is terrible, by the way.
It's handy to have a French woman, huh?
It certainly is, absolutely, and to be corrected, and particularly because my pronunciation is awful as far as French goes. I'm okay on Italian a little bit, but French is awful. But anyway, yeah, the idea that they have hearing and they hear something twice. So clearly the old psychological ideas of what deja vu is somewhat out of the water. So we're back to square one. Exactly what is a deja vu sensation?
Yeah. And why are we having them? What does it mean? Because I know you wrote many books.
System that you're going to have a headache or you're going to have a seizure. When they have them, one of the warnings is this sensation of you've lived this moment before. Now, it can be linked here because there is a neurotransmitter in the brain called glutamate. And glutamate is the major chemical of the brain that helps brain cells communicate with each other, called a neurotransmitter. But what is intriguing about this is that there is another phenomenon that glutamate is known to be responsible for, or directly responsible for, and it's something called the near-death experience. You know, the stories where you hear people are in car crashes, or they have a cardiac arrest or whatever, and they suddenly find themselves floating outside of their body. They find themselves meeting other beings, the being of light. They go to another place.
They see their past really fast.
But the interesting point is, one of the major typologies is something called a panoramic life review. And the panoramic life review, as you've probably heard people say, is my life flashed before my eyes. Now, if that is the case, and this neurochemical brings about this sense